Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Breaking Bias podcast. My name is Dr. Obbs, and I am joined on my podcast by my amazing, wonderful, jet-setting co-host, Molly. How are you doing today, Molly?
I'm doing good. How are you? I don't know if I'm really jet setting, but I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing good. This weekend, yeah, you're around. I guess the
Yeah.
Roval we've established is nearby you, so that's good. You might not be jet-setting this weekend. But today, we have a very special guest today. Our
Who is
guest is
jet
one of
setting?
Yeah, who is a jet setter, a legit jet setter. Our guest is one of the most recognizable faces in the F1 paddock. He's a member of three-time champion Oracle Red Bull Racing Team, where he wears many hats such as senior powertrain technician, pit crew member, STEM advocate, and recently adds author to his list, announcing the release of his book entitled Life in the Pit Lane, releasing worldwide February 27, 2025. Today, we welcome to the Breaking Bias podcast, Calum Nichols. How are you, Calum?
Thank you. That was an awesome intro. I couldn't have asked
You,
for a better intro. Thank you.
yeah,
How are
yeah.
you?
I came up with that on the fly, mate. Isn't it obvious?
Nice.
What is it with
Good.
all of these flying puns this morning?
Oh, I know. I'm sorry. It's because I'm about to get on a plane. I'm in
That's
like
fair.
this headspace now where I'm just ready to fly. I'm ready to fly.
Whereas
That's
me,
fair.
Speaking,
I've been like, home for like 3 weeks. It's been like my
Yeah.
longest period of not flying for a little while.
yeah, I was gonna ask
Yeah.
that, Callum. How's it been? Being back near your home and not having to fly away to a race in the past few weeks.
Yes, obviously, look, like you're always thankful. Like it's a long season, so you're thankful for all the time that you do manage to get home. So yeah, it's been really nice. Really just family time, trying to get your energy back. It's gonna be a long slog. These last six races, it's gonna be like really tough. Two triple headers. So yeah, just really trying to prepare.
That's right. Yeah, there's a lot that, we talk about this openly, whether it's on X or, in the media or things like that, about just what the teams and the team members go through in these double headers,
Yeah.
these triple headers. And it is quite intense. What's that like, Callum?
Well, I mean, it's tough. Like it's like 200 days a year in total. So from the start of preseason testing to the time we get back, I think we get back after we've got obviously the young driver test after Abu Dhabi. So I think by the time we get back from that this year, it's going to be 12th of December. So like we sort of end of Feb to 12th of December. It's like 200 days in the middle of the year. It's tough. It's probably one of the biggest sort of things that people doing this job sort of struggle with. It's a real challenge, and don't like I love traveling. It was one of the reasons I wanted to do the job in the first place. But yeah, it's only getting tougher at the moment. I guess the way you deal with it is just sort of the people you spend all that time with. They become, you probably spend more time with those people than you do with your family. Like every
Yeah,
day you're flying, you're working, and it's all about just sort of getting through it together. That's sort of how you cope with it.
absolutely. Molly, you want to take the first
Yeah.
question? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'm like, oh my God, that resonates so much as like I do in the Cup Series. I'm luckily not full-time travel, but we do 36 races in 39 weeks. So it's the
Yeah,
same thing where you kind of rock up the week before Daytona, middle of February, and then there's nonstop until December. It's the same
yeah.
thing. It's it's a lot, and I think when it ramps up to full time, it's going to be crazy as well. But before we get into like technical questions and some more in-depth pit lane and pit life questions, why don't we start with your background and your story? How did you find your way into racing? Was this a childhood passion? Were you kind of always a science kid, or was this something you kind of found along the way?
I'm gonna be honest. It wasn't. Oh, have I got you? Hey, we're back.
We're back.
I think I got you.
We're back.
Okay. It wasn't. You know what? It wasn't a childhood passion or anything like that at all. Um, More than anything, it was sort of something that, like, I knew when I left school that I wanted to work with my hands. Like, I
Hmm.
was always just a kid that was good with his hands. And I did sort of, by the time I was sort of 15, 16, I was like obsessed with anything motorized, cars, bikes, whatever. So when I left school, those were the sort of the only things I knew about myself. And I sort of fell into a job at a really small garage. And that was when I sort of kind of felt like I wanted to find a career working on cars. but I didn't know that that would be racing. I didn't know that that's what that career would be.
Yeah.
So I was working along in the garage, and then I got made redundant, and then I sort of fell into racing. Like I didn't even watch motorsport like in any sense at all prior to 2009. So like I got the opportunity to go to Silverstone for the Grand Prix in 2009, and I got to do the pit lane walk on a Sunday morning, and I was watching some teams outside do like pit stop practice and get all their stuff ready for the race, and I just sort of a moment where I sort of said to myself, you know what, I can do that. You know, I could do that job. You know, I've been working on cars for a couple of years at this point, and so I went back to college. I found a college. There's a college based at Silverstone, and I went back to college. And I sort of just built from there. I went back to sort of being an apprentice, and I built my way up through GP3. Had the opportunity to do a couple of Le Mans, and yeah, then eventually got my first F1 role, and it's sort of been, so that was like 3 years from when I decided I wanted to do it as a career, nearly 4 years. But then after that, once I was in F1, it was sort of just a progression from there to here.
That's amazing.
That's super
I
cool.
think, yeah, everybody has such a great story about how they get into it, and then, once they get into it, how much life kind of changes. It sort of consumes them and takes them over. I think one thing that we find really, really fascinating about the pit crews and the pit teams is that it's not just one singular thing that you all are doing over a race weekend. You're very multi-hyphenated. You're wearing multiple hats. Talk to us a little bit about.
Really nice. It would be really nice to rock up and do pit stops on a Sunday and then leave.
Come to NASCAR. That's what they do.
I know, right?
I know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I need to do, man, because that sounds like an ideal job. We'd call that Hollywood. You know, if you got to arrive on Sunday morning, that was it. You see you later, guys. Have fun packing up.
Fly in on the team's private chartered flight Saturday night, Sunday morning, fly out after the race and rock up, do a couple pit stops and call it good, right?
Yeah,
like as much as we put into pit stops, as much as they're like part of the race, like the pit stops is sort of like, I consider it like the extra job that I do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So talk to us a bit about what kind of a race weekend encompasses for you, how many different hats you wear, what you're doing from the time that you get there to where you're ultimately then packing up and leaving.
Yeah, so we tend to arrive at a circuit on a Wednesday. So Wednesday, Thursday are our build days. So Wednesday, I guess you look at it as the day where you're trying to get the car together in one piece. So obviously when we're on flyaway races, the chassis, the gearbox, the engine, they're all shipped separately in their own boxes and their own travel systems. So Wednesday's the day you want to get the car together. You want to get all the bits around you. You want to get the car together. You want to set your patch, because obviously you're going to need a flat patch in the garage for the weekend to set up. So you'll set that patch. You get the water heater on, make sure you've got no major issues. Get hydraulics checks done on a Wednesday if you can before you get out. And then Thursday, you're waiting on a Thursday. Basically, you can't fire up until the FIA allow you to. Yeah. So in Formula One, on a Thursday, the FIA give you a fire up time. Is in a European race, it'll normally be around 1 p.m, 12:30, something like that. So you're not allowed to fire up the engine before then. So essentially on a Thursday, what you're trying to do is plan all of the rest of your work around that fire up time. So you'll try and get in early in the morning and you'll try and get straight into setup. You'll be hoping the engineers have already sent out their setup sheet. And now setup, obviously on these cars now, gone are the days when we used to get to do it with a bit of string and a ruler and settle the toes and a little digi gauge. Those were like, set up back then. You could do it in like 15, 20 minutes and it was easy. Like it was so quick. And now obviously all our setup now is done using a Leica Absolute tracker. So we have a laser tracker. Obviously the software that's connected to the tracker has all of the data points of the chassis and all the reference points. So it will go around and scan the car, and then it can tell you exactly where your camber is, your ride height, your toe, all of these things to within tenths of a millimeter. It's so ridiculously accurate that the problem is that it's a great tool. Obviously, it's so important, and we now use Leica for bodywork setup and legality checks and all of those things, and it's great. It's an amazing tool, but because of its ability, your whole day on a Thursday now seems to just be consumed with Leica, because if you've got all the things that you plan to scan done, then someone will come along. It's normally pedals. He'll come along and he'll go, oh, well, can we just do that wing as well? And let's just do this bit of the floor and let's do that. And it just becomes an obsession, you know? So for us,
Yeah.
Thursdays can be like really painful because you will just spend your whole day scanning. So Thursdays are pretty much spent doing all of that stuff, legality, bodywork, setup. Obviously the fire up's the big thing in the middle, signing off all of the systems on the car before we hit the track Friday. And then your last job on a Friday is pit stop practice. That's normally the last thing we do before we leave the circuit on a Thursday. And it'll be our biggest practice. It'll be our longest practice of the week. We'll run through all of the set pieces, nose changes, puncture stops, all of the things that, you know, would be out of the ordinary, but Thursday's our day to sort of get a bit of practice in on those stuff. Because then the rest of the week, our practices will be focused more on performance. But yeah, that's Thursday. Fridays are pretty good now. When I first started in this sport, Fridays were by far the worst part of any race weekend.
Really?
They were, oh my God, they were awful. So you had 2 1.5 hour practice sessions on a Friday.
Okay, fair.
But then your curfew, like, so you'd be in early, you'd normally leave the hotel maybe 7 a.m. And the curfew to be out of the paddock back then used to be like 1 a.m. Like, you know, so... And then you'd be back at it Saturday morning, you know, at the same time at 7. So, like,
Oh my God.
because of those long curfew periods, what you used to do on a Friday was as soon as FP2 was finished, you'd be changing usually your engine and gearbox, and then doing all of the jobs that you did on Thursday in just a few hours. So from the moment FP2 finished, it used to be this ridiculous rush on a Friday to get everything done, and you were there late, and it was super painful. Now Fridays, brilliant. They're great. 2 1-hour practice sessions and a curfew that's really early. So after the end of FP2, you've only got 3 hours to put a cover on the car. Like you have to have the car, you have to have it under a cover 3 hours after the end of FP2. So it means that you can't do gearbox changes and engine changes as a regular routine thing anymore. So it doesn't just become part of your plan. So it saves you, you know, you might have to do one if you have an issue, but for the most part, you go through most of the season keeping an engine and gearbox for the whole weekend now. So third Fridays now are pretty chill in comparison. Saturdays, obviously, Saturdays are a great day, right? Because quali's fun. You know, it's in terms of the workload, the cars are in part ferme once quali starts, so the workload's not too bad, but also like you get the buzz of a quali session. So Saturdays are a fun day at the circuit, and it's never a late finish unless you have an issue. So Saturdays are great, and then Sundays, obviously race day, it's just about focus. My Sundays for me, it's just about being focused and trying to put everything else out of your head for that couple of hours while you've got to go out into the pit lane, do pit stops. And then obviously the most grueling part of a Sunday for us as mechanics and technicians is pack up. So from the time the checkered flag drops, it tends to take us between 4 and 5 hours, if we're lucky, to get out of the circuit, to get everything packed in either the air freight or into the trucks and get out of there. So Sundays are a really long day. Sundays are normally about 14 hours. Yeah, and then it's normally pack a bag, try and get some hours of sleep, and then on the road, and the circus is gone, just like that.
Yeah. How does that differ from like a non-race week? Like when you're at the factory or you're back home, you're like typical race weekend and then your typical non-race weekend with the team.
So, okay, for us now, being back at the factory is quite rare in the season, in that whether it be a European build or a flyaway build, we will only do 1 day in the factory.
Okay.
So as all the race team, all the engineers, well, all the technicians and mechanics, obviously GP tends to have to go in and do some days throughout the week, but you know, he earns enough for that.
That's fair.
But for us, we're really lucky now. Like we will go in and we'll spend a day doing pit stop practice and building the cars to whatever state the plan is. So on a European, it's normally a rolling chassis. So we'll try and get the car in one piece on a Monday, and go in the truck pretty much complete. On a flyaway, you'll be trying to assemble maybe the front end onto the chassis, but it's still all going to be shipped separately. So you tend to get less done on a flyaway, and we'll have a shorter day, and we'll just make sure we get pit stop practice in and functional fitness. So we're sort of,
Mhm.
it's not bad for us now. Back when I was at
Oh.
Marussia and the team simply didn't have the personnel to allow people to do that. You know, I'd
Mhm.
be lucky to get 1 day off in between races.
Yeah.
You know, you
Wow.
at most, you like, you know, if the freight wasn't coming home, you might get 2 days off. But back then it really was like they didn't have, as a team, we weren't enough people to let the race team just have that time off.
Mhm.
So yeah, we're quite fortunate now. And pretty much all the teams now have a similar sort of system. I know that all the big teams, certainly, they do very few days in the
Mhm.
factory in between races.
Wow.
And
That's go ahead, Ups.
I was gonna say, Callum, you mentioned pit stop practice, and one of the things that Molly and I talk quite a bit about is just how intricate the choreography is with the teams, and and that shouldn't be a emasculating statement to say choreography is something that people attribute to like dance, but it truly is like a dance almost, like what you all are doing, and the muscle memory and stuff. I mean, talk to us about that. What is that side of caring for a pit stop, getting it down, to a science, to a choreography, to like a dance? What is that like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, choreography is exactly the right word. Like, I talk
Okay.
about it all the time. I talk about the dance that we do. Like, we tend to break pit stops down into like corner crews. So
Mhm.
with me and the two guys that are changing the wheel and my crew, we think of it as a rhythm, you know.
Mhm.
So one of the things that's really important to consistent pit stop practice and consistent pit stops is having as few personnel changes as possible. Like, you have people trained as reserves in every role in case you lose someone, but in terms of like when we've been at our absolute best and when we've really been on a run of amazing stops, it's always been when you've had consistently the same personnel doing the same jobs, because you learn how each other moves, you know. Like,
Mhm.
on my corner, one of the things that I always think about is the way I've been working with Jack, the guy that does the wheel on my corner. I've been
Yeah.
working with Jack for such a long time now that I'm able to predict exactly how he's going to, move, to the point
Mhm.
where I don't have to wait to see a wheel hit the axle. I will follow the nut in, and sometimes I'm even pushing it on because I rely on Jack,
Wow.
and I know that
Mhm.
he's so consistent
Mhm.
in putting the wheel on dead straight. You
Yeah.
know, like in the 4 or 5 years we've been working together, I can think of maybe like less than a handful of wheels that haven't gone on straight. Like, that's how
Mm.
consistent Jack has been over the
Wow.
years. So it gives me the confidence to
Mhm.
be able to chase that nut in. Whereas with someone
Mm.
else doing it in a different technique, I wouldn't have that confidence to do it. So then you lose time. So really, consistency in the crew is one of the
Mhm.
key factors. But other than that, I always say that rather than like the physical training, I say that sort of the cognitive training and things
Mhm.
to get my mind in order are way more important to me. I think when you've been doing pit stops for long enough in any role, the physicality of it becomes autonomous. You know, I don't think about what my arms have to do to operate the gun, what my hands have to do. I don't have to consciously think about any of that.
Mhm.
My body will do it. It is muscle memory. But
Yeah.
what I do need to do is make sure that I'm not thinking about anything else. You know,
Mhm.
like for
Yeah.
me, I know a stop's going to go well by the time I hit, like the first nut. Like, if I hit that first nut and I
Mhm.
know that I've got nothing else, my focus is entirely on that axle and there is not another thought in my mind, that's going to be the way that I can perform best. But that's a real
Yeah.
skill, and it takes a lot of practice and training, and experience more than anything.
Yeah. Do you find the trend of visual indicators, like with the LED lights or anything on the gun, something that's aided you, or you're so focused, you're like, I don't need a light, I don't need this, I don't need that. I'm so focused on that you have the cognitive ability to recognize and the muscle memory to do that.
Yeah, it's not like I don't need it thing, because
Yeah.
like, so the only light that I care to really look at on our wheel guns is when I believe I'm finished. I'm obviously
Mhm.
looking at the green light.
Yeah.
If that green light is solid and green,
Yeah.
then that's, when I first look at it, then that's
Mhm.
it. That's the only time I need to look at the lights. Just because when I started doing pit stops, they weren't there.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
my body is used to doing it by feel. you know, and realistically
Mhm.
it's the fastest way to do it because it's about
Yeah.
rhythm and feel, and also like even, you know, like the sound, you know,
Mhm.
I know that if I have all of these things, that feeling, that sound, that rhythm, I know that I can press that confirm button and know
Mhm.
that it's going to be okay. I
Yeah.
think if you were, for me, if I were having to look at a light to do that, I'd do it, but it
Mhm.
would be slower.
Yeah.
Dude, absolutely. I fully understand that because, you know, as somebody who played football my entire life, and proper football, not American football, you don't
Yeah.
have to tell me with science whether or not I struck a ball correctly. You
Yeah.
know, it's a feel,
Mm.
it's a sound. Like I always knew when I hit it right,
Mhm.
like a driver.
Yeah,
And, you know, the best sensor
absolutely.
in the car is the driver's, you know, rear ends. I mean, like they
Yeah,
feel the
yeah, yeah,
car.
Mhm.
And it's the same way, I'm
yeah,
sure, for you. Like, you know exactly, you know the sound, you know the feel when you're on. And then you
yeah.
just,
Mhm.
And also like now, like if you had to look at the lights and actually like do it that way
Yeah.
with the new rules, with the delays in the release, like you'd lose so
Mhm.
much time, man. Like
yeah.
those rules have like really
Yeah.
like made it very difficult to do pit stops
Mhm.
like fast, just because
Yeah.
by the time you account for driver reaction and the delays in the release, you know, you've lost like 3-4 tenths.
Yeah. You're at that point probably splitting how fast of a or not hand-eye, but eye-mind connection is in terms of like
Yeah,
visual processing at that point, basically.
yeah,
And I'm glad you mentioned kind of like thinking about how the pit stop went, because one of the things that we, you know, were wondering is what happens after a pit stop. I
Yeah.
mean, does everybody go back and just kind of chat with each other and be, "Hey, that was awesome, that was great," you know, or is it
Do
like, do you
shit
go
talk
watch
a slow
replays?
corner.
Yeah.
so
Like give each other like high fives.
if it's, you know what, if it's a good stop, there's probably like less of a reaction. You know, we expect to do
Yeah.
good stops. That's the
Mhm.
standard we've set for ourselves. You know, it's been like, you know, nearly 7 years of setting the benchmark over the season. So like it's not necessarily like every time we do a good stop, we're all going to be like, yeah, yeah, it's amazing. But you know, what one thing that will reaction is when something doesn't go well, that is actually when you see like the best of the team and the best of the people in the
Mhm.
garage, because you'll see that, come on, you know, it will be, come on, let's get on with it. Don't worry about that. Move on. We got the next stop coming up. And that's really when you see like the best of the people in the garage, is the way
Mhm.
you sort of
Yeah.
rally around, cracking on and getting the next one done and putting that one out your mind. What you will tend to find is every good stop, you'll tend to find that the gunmen will go straight over to the laptop in the corner of the garage because they'll all want to see who had the fastest time. So I do it. And I put my hands up, like I'm the first one. If I know we've had a really quick stop, I'm straight over to Rich in the garage, and I want to see the data. I want to see how fast it was.
Oh my gosh.
Go on now. You got to tell us. All right. What are you the fastest? Is your corner the fastest? Most consistent?
Well, so this is it's a tricky one, right? So overall, the front corners should always be fastest, right?
Okay. Why is that?
Mhm.
Well, because the
Yeah.
wheels are lighter, so you've got less
Ah,
weight to
right.
move.
Fair.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay. Okay.
and also like there's slightly less dish, so you can see the nut. As a gunman, you can see the nut on the fronts before you can see the rear, because they're not quite as sunk into the wheel covers.
Okay. Yeah.
um so I've always argued that the front corners should be the quickest, and to be fair, like, you know what, both of the corners on our crew, both of the front corners, like they're so good, like they're
Yeah.
so consistent, like they're excellent, and they're tough to beat. So when, you know, one of us rear corners does manage to pip them, we'll be the first to let them know about it.
Let them know about it.
I always joke with Cal. So Cal does the front right, so he's like next to me
Mhm.
essentially in the pit lane. And whenever I've had a good stop and I managed to beat him, and I'll just say to him, mate, I don't know how you've let that happen. The front corners arrived first. And he'd just be like, what are you talking about? Like, yeah, the front corners arrived first. Everyone knows that.
Incredible. So from an analysis side, you guys were talking about how like you'll run over to the laptop. Is there somebody like factory side or track side that's like sitting there watching timing, doing analytics in real time, or is that like an after the race kind of thing that y'all will do or they'll do and y'all can like look back at that? It's like in NASCAR, I know it as like, even if it's a good stop, everybody's hovered around the slow-mo in the pit box and they're like, oh,
Yeah,
I did
yeah.
that really bad. And there's usually a couple guys with stopwatches. You'll see them like standing watching the stop and doing like laps on the stopwatch to see what they're doing by hand.
Yeah, so we've got like a few different like ways of analyzing the stops. We have the overhead cam,
Yeah.
which is great for just seeing the whole process, and obviously you can run it in slow-mo and have a look at who was getting their wheels off quickest, on quickest, stuff like that. And then we have the helmet cam, so the 4 gunmen and the 2 jackmen all have cameras in their helmets.
Okay.
And we tend to use those more than anything. We tend to use those for like fault analysis,
Mm.
because in that 2 seconds for you to, like, let's say you have an issue with the gun, you're not looking at the lights, and it's almost impossible in those seconds for you to be able to define what that issue might have been. So that for like a good close-up analysis, those helmet cams are brilliant. But then obviously we have the data from the guns. So all the guns now are laden with loads of sensors. So you have like hammer strikes and the depth sensor, so it can see when it's on the axle, the trigger time, all of this stuff. And obviously the delays in the confirm button and things like that. So all of that stuff can be analyzed, and on Atlas we'll go over there and we'll have a look through all the data. And it's quite nice, like it gives you a rundown of like the stages that each corner are at, and you can sort of see where you are compared to your teammates.
Oh wow.
We really
cool.
like it.
Oh yeah.
And previously, Callum, you had mentioned functional training. I think you said functional training. And one thing that I find really fascinating, for instance, when I was learning more about NASCAR, Molly's been educating me about NASCAR. And one of the things that, I came to find out is that a lot of the pit crew members in NASCAR are like ex-American football players, or, they're straight up athletes. And that's something that we've always said as well in the Formula One teams, like, don't sleep on anybody in the in the garage, because they're athletes too. Like, this is an athletic sport. So what do you all do to prepare? Yeah.
Yeah, it's obviously the skills are different. Like you can understand why you have all these ex-sports players doing NASCAR, like the way that you have to do pit stops using the jacks and things like that. It makes perfect sense. And for us, like each role on the crew, like when we talk about functional fitness, it's about letting people train for that role. So for the guys that are doing wheel off and wheel on, it's explosive strength. It's explosive strength, and they work on their core, because all of those things, it's not just about performance, it's about staying injury free. Over the course of, it's such a long season, you probably do 100 live pit stops in the season, plus all of your practices. It runs into the thousands of pit stops you do. So just as important as the performance side of it, injury prevention is a big part of functional fitness. But all of the skills are different. So so explosive strength for one person, but for myself, like doing a wheel gun, I always think, my focus, my accuracy, my reaction time, those are the more important things to my role. Those are the more important skills. So those are the things I'm more likely to go and work on. And it's the same, like even the guys that are doing flap adjust, we were talking about this the other day. People doing the flap adjust, like it's a tiny little hole for like a 6mm Allen key, and you've got 2 seconds to get that little gun in there and pull the trigger for it to turn it. Like you can't miss it. Like they have to be so accurate. And you'll create like a guide, like an SLA printed guide, but essentially still they have to be spot on. Like every time, and you can't afford for one guy to miss it, because then the flaps are out as you're driving, and the driver's going to come straight on the radio and be like, no, there's something wrong with this front wing. And it's like, But that's one of we were talking about high pressure jobs. And in the past, I would have said, I've always said, like, no matter what goes wrong on a pit stop, the gunman always gets the blame. That's just how it looks. Right? It's just the way it goes, whatever. But I actually think the harder jobs, like one of the jobs I would never want to do is rear jack. Like, I'd never want to do rear jack, because, like, at least on front jack, the car's coming to you. Right? The car's coming to you. You just jump if he goes too long. It's fine. It's no big deal. You can be ready for that. But with the rear jack, you have to chase that crash structure, and it's it's only this big. You're talking about something that's only like a few inches wide, and you have to chase it in with that tiny little thing that's going to go under it and get it up, and you can't afford to not go far forward enough because it's going to slip off and it's going to end up on the floor, and then you're in real trouble. Or if you're slow getting it up, then the whole process on the rear end is slow. So rear jack, I think, is probably one of the jobs that I'd really struggle with. But in terms of training, that's it. It's about finding training for each job that people have to do.
And that's it's funny you say the rear jack, because my mind immediately goes to Aston Martin had at one point last year created this little tiny winglet which went right on the back of the rear crash structure, and everybody was like, how's the rear jack man just not going to obliterate this little small winglet? And the first time they did it, literally, it got destroyed.
Yep.
But then after that, it's like, you're not only taking somebody's job who's already hard, but you're making it even harder to be like, hey, just dodge this little one. And I bet the guy on your team's like, talking to the arrows, like, mate, don't anybody put a winglet on this freaking thing.
That's basically what happened there, was that the aero designers were more important than the pit crew designers, and they lost that battle.
Exactly.
Someone in engineering didn't consult the actual end user.
That was it, yeah.
That's typical. So flip side of jobs you wouldn't want to do. If you did any other job of the pit crew that isn't wheel, what would you want to do?
Oh, that's a tough one. To be fair, I feel like I'd like to do. I'd like to just do car release. I'll just have the lollipop, and I can make that call. I'll make that call because I'm going to tell you now. I'm going to release him every single time. You guys can find out over there. He's going.
Come up with like a cool like fighter jet release like signal and everything. Oh my gosh. That'd be so cool. Oh my gosh. So go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's funny though, because like when you think about jobs where somebody's exposed, you mentioned the wheel nut guy. I mean, like your job there, and I imagine that must be like an incredibly sinking feeling when you're like you're hitting it a couple times and like everybody's watching, and you must feel like pressure. But then the other one is the guy that's releasing the car straight away into traffic, and then it's like, 5-second penalty, and everybody's looking at this guy,
That might be equally as high pressure.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so you talked a bit about like injury prevention with like functional fitness and some of the stuff that y'all will do. It kind of in that vein. How do you guys change like choreography if you do of your stops? Is it like hey, this isn't working? Hey, let's try something different. Who comes up with those ideas, or how frequently do you change things, or is it kind of been very stable, like your wheel on, wheel off process, very stable year to year kind of thing?
I mean, it's something that's developed over years. So like the last time we would have sort of really thought about any major change to the choreography would have been with the bigger wheels. And even then it was more of a case of we just need to change training and be prepared for the heavier wheels more than anything else.
Okay.
It's something that's led sort of by everyone. So where we've always sort of divided it up in terms of the wheel change part of the pit stop is we've always sort of said like the corner crews will work together. So with my corner crew, the three of us, we sort of find what works for us, and there's a general place you'll start in terms of the way that you'll do things. But then between the three of you, there might be little things that differ just because that's what works for you as a crew. So, for example, I sit way further away from the axle than the other gunmen. So like the other gunmen, they sit a lot closer than me. I've got quite long arms, so I actually feel way more comfortable sitting that far away. And the advantage of it is that it gives the two guys either side of me just a bit more space. So it's something that we do that works for us. And even like down to little things like positioning, like Jack will wait for me to pick my position and where I'm going to sit, and then he will rest his foot against my knee. And that's sort of how we use like little markers like that for us to always be able to do something that's repeatable. Because this is the thing about pit stops, more than anything, it's about doing something that's repeatable each and every time.
Is there you talk about where like you're going to sit? Are you guys allowed to like mark on like in the box like an indicator where you consider a reference point? Okay.
Yeah, we do it. So like I tend to only do it when it's an anti-clockwise circuit. So I'll probably do it in Texas where I have to where I'll have to pull the spare gun out with me where I go for a pit stop. I'll want somewhere where I can just throw it and know that it's on that mark and it's roughly where I need it to be. So
Okay.
like I'll just put a bit of tape there. But even for like the pit stops, I think the wheel on man on the right front, Luke, he gets one of our garage technicians each race does a little like mural on the floor, like depending on where we are, like the country that we're in, he's quite the artist. So he'll just sort of paint in a certain position that he'll measure out in the pit box each week. He'll paint something to do with the place that we're racing, and then that's where Luke will put his foot for the start of the stop.
Oh, that's super cool. That's such a fun little Easter egg too.
Yeah. Ollie's been very proud of his artwork.
Yeah.
That's great to know. And you mentioned choreography and practice and things like that. I'm sure, once you get to the track and you're doing the pit stop practices, the live practices, and also live practices in FP, it's, the most realistic, repeatable thing that you can train. But what about when you're not at the track and you're having to do training either at the factory or wherever you all do your training? Are you doing, what's the difference between, like, say, doing training on a static rig versus, say, doing it on a dynamic rig where something is coming in and then now you got to hit it? What's that?
We're lucky in that even at the factory we have an old car. So we have an old car that's got an electric motor in it that we can use for pit stop practice. So we still have someone essentially drive the car in, even in the workshop.
Cool.
It's an older car that's obviously been modified to make sure that everything's as close to representative of our current race car as it can be. It's never perfect, but it does give us a sort of good reference. It's something that's useful, certainly at the beginning of the year. It's like something that you come back in January, you've all had time off. It's a great way to just sort of get straight back into it because it's completely different. Doing like stops on a static car, like it's in no way like comparable. So it's really not that useful for us. So having a car that's able to drive in and almost replicate what we need at the circuit is massively valuable.
Yeah.
And how important is it? And I'll ask this question tentatively because I know that how you answer it could be not controversial but spicy. How important is it that your driver is just dead nuts on hitting their marks? Because that's something that Molly and I talk about. You're setting yourself up in a certain spot, right? And I'm sure that certain drivers maybe are better than other drivers at hitting their marks. But what's that like? Sorry, let me ask that question a different way. Do you prepare for some drivers differently than other drivers, let's say?
I don't prepare for some drivers differently than others. I go into it in my head that it doesn't really matter where they stop. I'm watching the nut and I'm going to hit it when it stops. Right? So like it's not that I expect a driver to be long or short or whatever. More so than I think, if you're only talking about maybe like 3-4 inches either way, like it's not that crucial. But what is crucial is the approach. So like for me as a gunman, the driver's approach, what you want is you want the car to come in and you want it to be one braking moment. So it's one braking moment, the car stops where it is. One thing that can be like a nightmare is if the car begins to slow and then the driver comes off the brakes and then brakes again. Like that completely, when you're trying to track a nut, because that's what you're trying to do essentially. You're trying to track that speed of the wheel nut so that as it comes to a stop, you're on it. So then if you get sort of halfway through that and then the nut sort of, the braking moment stops and then starts again, that's one of the biggest things. So the approach is in some ways more important than where you stop. And also like you can stop long. Like being long in the box is not so bad. Like especially like for me, if the car's long, I'll just catch the nut as it comes past me, which is quite cool. I think it's quite enjoyable anyway. But it's probably not going to slow you down as much as if you stop short. Because if you stop short and I'm trying to wait for that nut to get to here, then I'm gonna. If you stop really short, I'm gonna have to move. But yeah, the approach is important. It's obviously the very first part of that dance that you talk about.
Yeah. I have a random tangent question, but with that, I don't know if you can answer this, but how do drivers prepare for that or practice that? Because it's such limited track time and that's really only like a true environment on track that they can do. Is there things they'll do to practice that, or how do they practice that to make sure that they're always on the marks and only have that braking moment and get that
Yeah.
feedback for them?
Well, I mean, one thing that we do throughout the week, throughout practice, is we'll do live stops at the end of like runs. So when the car's out for its practice runs, we'll just do a practice pit stop. And obviously the drivers then, they'll be told it's a practice pit stop, so they know that they need to be focused on those marks and let's just go.
Okay. And then my random question, I realized we probably didn't ask this and it's so important. Can anybody be pit crew? Like if you are already there and you're at factory and you wanna pit, you can, I think, try out or do a race. I think one of the favorite things I learned from one of the Talking Bull episodes was Nicola was saying, or one of the guys was saying, that there's like an IT guy on the pit crew or something like that.
If you're traveling, then there's no reason why you can't sort of put yourself in for a role on the crew.
Okay.
It's like anything. Like if you're there at the circuit and you're full time at the circuit, I think one of the things that we do tend to have as sort of a bit of a policy is that if it's one of those things where you do every race. If you want to be on the pit crew, really, you're going to have to be personnel that do every race because you don't want that change of personnel throughout the season. So it tends to be that it'll be full-time staff that will be on the pit crew. But anyone can do it. Yeah, Olaf was our rear jackman for years. He was he was IT. He was huge though. He was perfectly built for this job. He was big. Exactly. He was perfectly built for this job. So why wouldn't you use that person? Yeah.
Yeah.
And if anybody knows about pressure to hit a rear crash structure with a rear jack, it's going to be the IT guy. They're always under pressure, you know. There's like a mental capacity there that nobody
when the garage Wi-Fi's gone down and everybody's
shut. Right, yeah.
Exactly.
There's like mental fortitude built over time by IT drama.
Nothing would phase that man, probably.
That's right. Speaking of high performance, Calum, I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that's so admirable about your team, you know, about Red Bull and the pit crew, and especially when you talk about like 2023 and the run that you guys were on, is that everything has to go right. And that is so rare. I mean, we're talking about not only car performance, driver performance, pit stop time. I mean, you guys are consistently, I think I saw the latest average for pit stop times across the grid that you guys are number one so far on pit stop times, I think, amongst all the teams. Yeah. Woo, all right. So, but McLaren did pip you guys with the fastest pit stop time ever. It's like he's fuming inside. I can see it.
So it's one of those things. It doesn't like annoy me like that they beat our record. Do you know what? More than anything, I think to myself, like when we were in that sort of phase where we were really like every week we were pushing that record. Like it was 3 consecutive races at one point to get to like 1.82, and like I did find it odd that they haven't sort of seemed to get back to doing those fast times like since that race. Like I don't know, like it just kind of surprised me. Like they were like they're like a really informed crew, and they've been consistently quick, but like they've never managed to get down to that sort of previous time.
Yeah.
Like if I were them, I'd be like, well, what's going on, boys? We did a 1.8. We're ready to do a 1.7.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like for us, obviously, we feel the same in our garage. You know, we want to get close to that record, and the thing that we're finding an obstacle is more than anything is having to deal with these new delays and these pit stop rules. But McLaren managed to do that pit stop under these rules, so I just found it a little bit odd that they've never managed to get close since.
That's an interesting question, but what about that pit stop? Like, is there a level of secrecy to where
it's a thing of beauty when you watch it?
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. Do you guys go back and watch it and study it and all this stuff?
Yeah, and look, this is something that goes on like up and down the pit lane. Like for years, we used to have people come and sit and watch our pit stop practices from the other end of the pit lane, and it's the same thing, you know. Like McLaren did something amazing; they broke that record, and it's natural for you to want to see how it's been achieved. So yeah, we've watched the videos plenty. We've sort of looked at it. We've looked at if there's anything that we feel significantly better than the way we're doing it. In terms of things like, you know, the problem we have now is that when we were constantly chasing these records, it was prior to the cost cap.
Hmm.
So if there were things that you could improve, especially
Yeah.
like with things like your equipment, if there were things that you could improve, you had the resources to get it back to design and it goes straight into design and you deal with it. And now
Yep.
you don't have that ability, that's an in-cap cost. So you can't just say, oh, well, we could make this a bit quicker and spend this much money, and it's just not going to happen. You can't go to Pierre Wache and say, oh, look, we can save 1/10 off of every pit stop if you spend 100 grand. He's just going to laugh.
Yeah. Yeah, bin
Yeah.
that arrow upgrade because we're gonna
Yeah.
send it on a pit stop.
Yeah, and
I imagine.
none of it's cheap, like it's not.
Yeah.
As engineering and racing, it was one of the first things I was taught at college. They said to us, motorsport is expensive. And that's the reality of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And everything for us is even more expensive because we have what you call the F1 tax. So if you go out to any company and ask them to, try and outsource a design or manufacture of anything, and they see it's for an F1 team, you've also got that added F1 tax.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's so true. It's interesting to learn that that's part of the pit cost and development cost is part of the cost cap. I didn't know that at all.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
That's something I just learned today. Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, and that's super.
It's a garage equipment, so it's
that's
equipment
fair.
you're using to run the car.
Yeah. Boy.
That's fascinating because I was curious. It was one of the things I was curious is like how big is spy photography? How big is like walking up and down and seeing what the others are doing, or like the competitive intelligence side of watching other stops and
realistically, with this cost cap, the only things that you're really going to change are what you're doing rather than what you have to do it with. So.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I'm going to ask this. I'm curious. We talked about this a little bit before where it's like NASCAR would be fun, get in and out. If you had to pick one series to pit that you haven't pit in before, what would you pit and would it be the same role?
It would absolutely be NASCAR, and it would absolutely be the same role.
Absolutely. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm ready to hit those wheel nuts. No problem. Yeah.
That would be awesome. And mate, you would be a total rock star in the NASCAR world because they like, they interview the pit guys during the race.
British guy. Who does he think he is?
You would be awesome. We'd get you a nice little cowboy hat too and everything that you could wear, so you'd be like proper NASCAR.
Oh my gosh, yes. That'd be so fun. We gotta get like I always say I want to see like not necessarily Red Bull, but I want to see F1 and NASCAR do a full swap. And I think that would be so fun to try that with like some of the partner sponsors or something. Just get you all to like swap and try each other's stops and like try.
I mean, in terms of the pit stops, honestly, that'd be an amazing challenge. Like, I'd love that. Yeah. I'd love to see how long. Fun. More than anything, I'd love to see how long it would take me to get up to some sort of competitive speed with the people who've been doing it for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So exactly. I'd love that.
I think it probably would be surprising how quick y'all would pick it up.
Do Red Bull sponsor a NASCAR team? Surely this is something we can take to marketing.
Yeah, we need to get on there.
Well, there's 2 Red Bull drivers in NASCAR.
Oh, okay, brilliant. So this is something that we can get a collab on. This would be some great content.
Yeah, it'd be so fun. Like with the Red Bull drivers or Ford's in NASCAR.
Perfect. Right, I'll get on to marketing on Monday.
Yeah.
I'm in work tomorrow, so I'll get on to them straight away.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can invite out Breaking Boss to do the technical analysis.
That sounds like a fair. One
stipulation, I have to be there.
Yes, that's right.
Oh my gosh. Back onto questions though. Tangent aside, I think we kind of talked about this. Like in racing, failure's not like super an option. And you guys have kind of had your fair share of challenges. How do you guys find yourself managing like challenges, technical, non-technical, bad stops? I think we touched on this a little bit when they arise. How do you kind of face that? Because it's very like a win or don't and like don't fail kind of space.
I think for us in the garage, you're right. It's very much, we go in with the mindset that second place is the first loser. Mm-hmm. We always want to win. Every single week, that's the goal, to win. But sometimes, this is Formula One. Everyone else in that paddock's there to win as well. and you're not always going to be in a position where that's possible. I mean, look, I started in 2015. You know, I injured RB11, which was our worst car in like the
You
history
need
of
a
the team.
shirt that says I
You know, this
survived
is
RB11 and all I got was this t-shirt.
Oh
but
man.
this is it. Like this is it. I survived that, so I
Yeah.
sort of know what it's like to win. I know how
Mhm.
hard it is to lose, but I also know the reward for when you manage to get back there is always worth it. So
Mhm.
it's one of those, in terms of the mentality in the garage, it's just like we just have to keep working. You know, keep working or go home. Like, you know,
Yeah.
there's no in between here.
Mhm.
So that's what you do each week. You keep working, and for us in the garage, more than anything, look, our job as a mechanic or technician, my job is to make the car reliable.
Mhm.
You know, is to make the car reliable. That's my biggest job. Get it to the end of every weekend, make it do what it's supposed to do. It's up to the drivers and the engineers to make the car fast.
Mhm.
You know, so for
Yeah.
me, I know what I can control, I know what I can't control, and
Mhm.
I sort of focus. I just sort of try and focus on those things. If you try and let everything else that's going on in this paddock or in the sport or in the team get into your head, then you're kind of lost, man. You've got
Mhm.
no chance. You have to just sort of focus on the things that you know you can control. Know that, you know, with all the good days we had, it was never going to last forever. But
Yeah.
just like the days when we weren't winning before 2021, we'll just keep doing what we did. You know,
Mhm.
we'll just keep building and building and working and getting back to where we want to be.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I really respect about that attitude, Callum, is that like it's very much like a championship attitude.
Mhm.
You know, that it doesn't matter if we're talking about Formula One, NBA basketball. I mean, that Kobe mentality, that's what, you know, we always talk about here in the States. It's like, you know, we're just going to keep working, keep
Mhm.
grinding. We're going to get
Yeah,
back. We're going to get back there, you know, and you guys, I mean, you don't become champions by accident. You
no,
know,
No.
I mean, so it's everybody on that team's got that championship mentality. And I really do appreciate you, Callum. I mean, especially spending some time with us to talk. And I think you're always very open and welcoming with your time to speak on things. And one of the things, yeah, one of the things you've been really, you know, vocal about as well as representation across the grid. And I think it's incredibly admirable. I mean, you know, whether we're talking about, you know, people of color in the grid or we're talking about, you know, women on the grid as well. Um, Equality is such an important thing. Doesn't matter if we're talking about motorsports or, you know, even in my career, you know, workplace, everybody having the same opportunity and everybody, you know, getting a chance to do what they love.
yeah.
You know, what can we do? What needs to happen in motorsports for us to be able to move forward with, you know, equality and representation and things like that?
That's the thing. I always say that, motorsport, it isn't for everyone, but we need it to be a place where it can be for anyone.
Mhm.
And like, so for me, there's sort of the two things that I tend to think about when I think of the issues are the implicit biases that we still, you know, like, certainly I've always said for women in technical roles, they're still dealing with implicit bias all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing for me is, so it's certainly from a UK perspective, I can't really speak on what it's like in the US, but from the UK perspective and our education system, like I have some like major gripes just with the way that we fail to adequately teach engineering in a hands-on
Mhm.
environment. You know, like we're great. We've got loads of great universities if you want to go and study engineering and be in a classroom. But what we
Mm-hmm.
sort of failed to do, certainly in some of our poorest schools, simply because of funding, is that we fail to teach engineering in a hands-on
Mhm.
environment. And what that does is it excludes so many people from even discovering racing
Mm-hmm.
as a
Mhm.
career option. You know, we fail to teach it in practical ways. Like even my school, I went to a really good school. I was really fortunate growing up, but there was just no focus on engineering, really.
No.
And even where and for the most part, I always felt that our schools in the UK, that we're more interested in teaching people to be workers, like to be employees, than we are in teaching people to go out and create something.
Mhm.
You know, and I think that's another part of it. You know, if you want engineering, creativity is a huge part of engineering. You
Yeah.
know, but so many people who don't really do academic classroom work miss out because
Mhm.
there's just those opportunities to work in a hands-on environment aren't there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
furthermore, with apprentices, I've been a huge advocate for apprenticeships for people with, you know, socioeconomic barriers, being able to earn while you learn is absolutely crucial
Yes.
for any industry.
Absolutely.
And, you know, like
Mhm.
provision for apprenticeships is sort of here and there in the UK, but one of the things that we have a massive issue is with the red tape that comes with it
Mm.
all. And,
Mhm.
you know, for a lot of businesses, it's almost not worth doing, because it's so much has to go into taking an apprentice and doing this kind of stuff with them. So, yeah, I try and advocate for the things that I know will help. You know, implicit bias, I think, is one of those things that, unfortunately, it's a long battle and it's time. As the next generations start to take control of the sport and work in management positions, I think those things will sort of rectify themselves. But with education, I think it still needs to take funding and a conscious effort to want to change it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and Callum, it takes voices like yours. It takes platforms like you have, and taking the leadership. You know, you talk about, you know, in the UK, them teaching people to just want to work for somebody. I mean, I think the opposite of that is like understanding that each voice has an opportunity to be heard, and you are a leader. It doesn't matter. You don't have
Mhm.
to be a manager. You don't have to be a team principal. You have an opportunity to be a leader, and you're certainly taking that, and you're doing an amazing job of that, mate.
Mhm.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I really appreciate it.
So as we mentioned, and I think this will be a fun tie-in. We love segues on this show. Your book Life the Pit Lane releases February 2025 next year, and you were talking about the creativity from the engineering side. Was that kind of a creative outlet for you? And as we wrap up here, as people want to know about the book and readers learn about the book, what do you want them to feel, and what do you want them to take away from that, and kind of just plug the book and plug some of that stuff here and then as we wrap up.
Yes, I think with Life in the Pit Lane, what I wanted was I wanted somewhere where I could offer all of the great advice I've been
Mhm.
given, warn people about some of the bad advice that they'll be given if they want to take on a career in racing. Because it's not just about Formula One, it's about the whole picture. When I talk about motorsport, I talk about it, you know, in a more holistic term, and the way that we can sort of put yourself in a position where you can, if you want to, build an amazing career in racing. You know, like so many people still message me asking me about how they can get started. And this
Yeah.
was, you know, I can't answer everyone's questions all day long, but
Mhm.
this was a place where I could try and put all of my best advice into. And hopefully, you know, recounting some of my amazing experiences, some of the things that I've been so lucky to sort of achieve in the sport, hopefully inspire some more people to take on careers. It's one of these things. Like when I wrote a book, so like I sort of asked myself, why do I want to write this book? And I think to myself that, look, I'm not going to be doing this forever. Like this is still a young person's game. Like I'm not going to be turning spanners in the paddock when I'm, you know, in my late 40s and 50s. So I wanted to leave behind something that didn't exist before I was here. And for me, when I
Okay.
first started out in the sport, there was no information, you know, really of how people can go about it. Like the whole industry was so about word of mouth and networking, and, you know, even like nepotism. It was so hard for people to get a foot in the door
Yeah.
that I wanted to try and sort of highlight some of the things that you can do to try and build what can be like an amazing career. You know, like there's not many
Yeah.
jobs where people will pay you and fly you around the world to build like these incredible bits of engineering. So yeah, I just was hoping that I can inspire at least some and inform everyone else, and hopefully even those that aren't interested in working in the sport can enjoy some of the tales that no one else will tell you.
Yeah.
I think for me, that's one of the really exciting things that I'm looking forward to, Callum. You know,
Yeah.
once I get the book, is like hearing a few of those sort of off track stories and some of the things. And um, I think, you know, one of the things that when you announced the book that I was not surprised about was that you were writing a book, because you are all about giving back, mate. I mean, and I'm not just trying to fire you up here. I'm just speaking
Fire
truth,
him
you
up.
know.
Come on, gas him up,
I know,
Oz.
it's like, but it's the truth, you know. I mean, whether you're doing what you're doing there on X and Twitter, where, you know, there's not a whole bunch of people that are very vocal or have a voice in that platform. They actually err on the side of just not saying anything. But
Yeah, for sure.
you always do it in a way that you want to help educate. You want to help people understand things, whether it's providing context to things that people are talking about. it's going on a different podcast and sharing your story or writing a book.
Mhm.
All these things I feel like are similar, in a sense. It's all about giving back. And I can certainly see, from your spirit there, I'm a pretty good judge of character, that you're a giver. So, and I can get down with those kinds of people. So I'm really
I
looking forward
appreciate
to,
it. Oh, thank
yeah,
you, man.
I'm
Like,
really
honestly,
looking forward to,
Yeah.
you
sorry, go
said
ahead.
about a lot of people on social media. I got to say, your interactions that we have on social media are often like my favorite ones. Like the rest of the place,
Yeah.
the rest of, like between like yourselves and a few others, like there's a few like it's just nice to have the same minds that also don't take
Yeah.
themselves too seriously.
Oh my gosh.
Like
Yeah.
because that's me. I try and I don't consider myself particularly controversial. I also don't take myself that seriously. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
mate. I just think of the whole, and one of the things that Molly and I, like, we haven't talked about it once, but the whole cross break drama. And it was so funny because, like, when it came up, and then and I was just like, and that's probably one of the times where maybe I might have lost my cool a little bit. And then somebody was like, somebody goes, what would you know? And you're like, mate, I've been building the car for like,
that was it. That might have been an all-time, like,
hang it in the
John.
room.
The thing is that I fully accept that that people are never gonna just accept that what I say is the truth. They're always
Yeah.
going to assume that I speak on behalf of the team, and it's absolutely the opposite. Like it's
Yeah.
absolutely the opposite. Like so many people have said to me, "Oh yeah, well I bet you had to get permission." Like I didn't get permission to go and write Life in the Pit Lane.
Mhm.
I decided that I wanted to write an honest book about motorsport. And then I did what I was obliged to do, which is I've told Red Bull that I'm going to be releasing this book, and I told them that
Mhm.
before we announced it. But in terms of the writing, I was, or my opinions on social media, like I'll only ever just express my honest opinions. Like I really,
Mhm.
Yeah.
like I don't really have this thing of I'm going to toe the company line or whatever. Like, yeah, I might choose to not speak about stuff, but if I've decided to speak up on it, you can know that it's my own view and it's mine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's sort of my thing.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have to say, and we're rounding third here and coming to home plate. It's been an honor, mate. It's been
Yeah.
awesome. We really loved having you onto the podcast, and thank you again for being so
Mhm.
gracious with your time.
It's been a long time coming, I think.
Yeah, yeah, it has.
Absolutely, and thank you for your support.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that Breaking Bias podcast is all about is when Molly and I formed this podcast, and it was kind of our brainchild, and we were sort of thinking about what we wanted it to be. It's by no accident, okay, breaking bias is a motorsport terminology and motorsport thing, but we wanted to ensure that we would, be there as a platform to help break the biases of motorsports. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about like biasing motorsport, your love for motorsport. Some people only think, hey, F1's the only thing. I mean, there's so many other motorsport categories as well that you can follow, which we do love F1, or, breaking the biases of, gender stereotypes, racial stereotypes. I mean, all these kinds of things. And I look at this crew that we have on this call right here on this pod taping, and I'm thinking, this is exactly how things should be. This is what we are like. We are all of different backgrounds. We're all of different places, and it's all about breaking those biases. So
Mhm.
hopefully everybody has really enjoyed this podcast. I know we've enjoyed
Yes.
doing this podcast and having a chat with Calum today. And any final parting words or thoughts or anything from you, Calum, before we
No,
go?
I just wanted to say thank you for having me today.
Mhm.
It's been great. I've really enjoyed our chat. It's been nice. It's been relaxed. This sort of the way I like to do things. So yeah, thank you guys so much.
Of course, you're
Definitely.
welcome. Come back, and you are welcome back anytime.
Yes,
Do
please.
you want to plug for our listeners where they can find you
Yeah.
outside of the pod?
Yeah, for sure. You can follow my journey on socials, on Instagram, on Twitter. I'm still calling it Twitter, but you can follow me at F1Mech. Yeah, so at F1Mech, you can follow me on both of those. Get in touch with me there. Yeah, I'm about.
Yeah, and make sure to follow Calum on Instagram, because he does some cool stuff as well as he travels. He'll do a little bit of some pit checks and some gear checks and stuff like that. So it's really nice. Yeah, it's a good thing outside of motorsports that you do there as well. But Thanks again,
Nice.
Calum. We really appreciate your time. And just for all of our listeners, make sure and follow Breaking Bias on all our socials, whether it's on X, on Twitter. We've got an Instagram, which Molly's doing an amazing job of running, and I need to do a much better job of
I
contributing
can only
to.
manage so many socials on top of the full-time
I
motorsports
know.
engineering job.
I'm so sorry.
Molly's
And
decided that she doesn't want the hassle of Twitter. That's basically what's happened.
pretty much. We haven't made our way over to Threads yet, which it seems like
I
Threads is
refuse.
Neither
picking
have
up.
I refuse.
Neither have I.
But definitely, follow Breaking Bias on all your favorite platforms. Make sure and download, share with your friends, and same message as usual. Let's break the biases. Let's all, contribute together and realize that we all have one voice. And thank you all so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Yep. See you next time.